What if the people closest to you were keeping a secret that could change everything you believed? My name is Rachel Lawson, and the night I found out I was never truly part of my husband's family started with a lie so casual it almost slipped past me unnoticed. "No big deal," he said, fingers flying across his phone screen while I stirred the soup on the stove. "Just a quick family get-together this weekend at the lake house. The usual suspects. You know how it is." The words didn't land right. Not because of what he said, but how he said it offhand, detached, almost like he hoped I wouldn't ask more. But I did. "Which lake?" I asked, keeping my voice light. He didn't look up. "Willow Bay. Where we went for Dad's birthday last year." The spoon paused in my hand. Willow Bay wasn't a casual place. It was their go-to venue for holidays, anniversaries, and milestone events that came with formal invitations, floral centerpieces, and curated playlists. It was never just a spontaneous gathering. Still, I nodded, even smiled. I didn't want to seem paranoid or difficult again. Because after 5 years of marriage, I'd learned one thing with the Lawsons: appearances were everything. My husband Evan was polished and measured, the type of man who never left a voicemail unreturned or a hair out of place. His family mirrored him, always poised, always polite, always perfectly distant. I was never yelled at, never insulted. I was simply invisible. Even now, as he moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, setting the table and pouring the wine, something in his tone told me I wasn't meant to be there that weekend. And not just physically. He poured my glass and gave me that smile, the one that says, "Don't dig into this. You'd be bored anyway." It's just Dad droning on about his boat and Emily showing off her new kitchen backsplash. "Besides, didn't you say your college friends were trying to plan something this weekend?" He wasn't wrong. Kara and Jenna had floated the idea of a cabin getaway to decompress from work stress. I'd hesitated, unsure if I should leave Evan alone. But maybe that was the point. Maybe he was hoping I'd have somewhere else to be. So I leaned into it. "Yeah," I said slowly, "maybe I'll reach out to them. It could be fun." He smiled wider. "Perfect. We'll both have our little escapes." That night after dinner, I sat alone in our bedroom scrolling through old photos. Birthdays, holidays, family reunions. In nearly every picture, I stood slightly off to the side, sometimes cropped out, sometimes with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. Evan, on the other hand, was always centered part of the pack. I'd always told myself it was in my head, that I needed to try harder. That acceptance took time. But time apparently had an expiration date, and 5 years should have been enough. As I sat there, doubt thick in my chest, I made a quiet decision. I would go on that girls' trip. I would stop waiting for a family to notice I existed. And yet, despite everything, the growing suspicion, the tiredness in my bones, the ache of feeling like a guest in my own marriage, I still wanted to believe Evan loved me enough to protect me from this slow fading into irrelevance. So before he left that Friday morning, I tucked a little note into the side pocket of his travel bag. Just a post-it, really. A pink square with a heart, and 3 words, "Miss you already." It wasn't meant to be dramatic. It was just hopeful, maybe childish, maybe foolish. But mostly it was my way of saying I'm here. I matter. Please don't forget. And if you've ever held on to hope when everything else told you to let go, if you've ever questioned your place in someone else's world, leave a like and stay with me. Because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and myself. The cabin my friends had picked was 3 hours north of the city, a modest A-frame nestled among tall pines with creaky wooden floors, mismatched mugs, and the kind of silence that swallowed you whole. It wasn't fancy, but it was honest, real. When I stepped out of my car and saw Jenna waving from the porch, something inside me unclenched. Kara emerged behind her with a bottle of red wine in one hand and a throw blanket in the other. "Girls' weekend starts now," she grinned. "Phones off, drama out, and marshmallows at the ready." I smiled. A real one this time. Maybe this was exactly what I needed, a weekend without pretense where no one measured my worth by how well I matched the drapes or poured the Pinot. That first evening, we sat in a circle by the fire, sipping wine wrapped in blankets, swapping stories that ranged from hilarious to heartbreaking. At one point, Jenna asked about Evan's family, and I hesitated. "They're polite," I said carefully. "Polite," Kara repeated, raising an eyebrow. "That's never a good sign." "It's like being in a museum," I admitted. "Everything is curated and quiet, and you're not sure if you're allowed to touch anything." They both laughed, but I didn't. Because I wasn't joking. The next morning, we hit the slopes early. The mountain air was crisp and clean, biting at my cheeks, making me feel awake in a way I hadn't in months. I wasn't athletic by nature, but skiing forced me to be present. Every twist, every turn, every breath became immediate and undeniable. There was no space for overthinking, no room for self-doubt. By lunchtime, we were gathered in the lodge. Cheeks, pink fingers, frozen hearts light. We sipped hot chocolate topped with whipped cream and tiny marshmallows, talking over one another, laughing like we used to in college dorm rooms. "You look happy," Jenna said, snapping a photo of me leaning back in the overstuffed leather chair, cocoa in hand, hair tousled by the wind. I was, and I hated how foreign that feeling felt. But just as I started to type a caption for that photo, something about mountain air and soul resets. A notification popped up. "Carol Lawson tagged you in a photo." Carol, Evan's aunt. We weren't close. She'd always smiled politely at family events and asked about my job without waiting for the answer. My stomach flipped as I tapped the notification. The image filled my screen. Carol in a burgundy gown, a crystal chandelier above her head. A caption beneath that read, "So proud of my youngest nephew's engagement." What a magical night. Engagement. My eyes scanned the background. Cream linens, gold-rimmed glassware, a dance floor. I recognized the venue, Willow Bay's main banquet room. And then I saw them. Marcus, Evan's younger brother, down on one knee, Sarah crying, a diamond ring catching the light. Behind them, champagne glasses raised in a toast, his mother in navy blue, his father at her side, his sister mid-laugh. And there, unmistakably, was Evan, my husband, in a tuxedo I'd never seen, hair slicked back, smiling, glowing, part of it all. Without me, every breath I'd taken in that lodge turned cold. This wasn't a casual gathering. This wasn't the usual suspects talking about boats and backsplashes. This was a carefully orchestrated family milestone, and they'd chosen to exclude me. Deliberately. If you've ever scrolled through a screen and felt your world split in two, if you've ever found out the truth, not through a conversation, but through a caption, then tell me in the comments. Where were you when it all unraveled? Because I remember, I was holding a mug of cocoa. And suddenly, I couldn't feel my hands anymore. I didn't say anything right away. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stared at my phone like it had turned into some foreign artifact, a portal to a world I wasn't meant to see. A world that included everyone except me. I zoomed in on Evan's face. He was smiling, genuinely smiling. That soft-eyed, relaxed kind of joy I hadn't seen on him in months, maybe years. He wasn't acting like someone who'd left his wife at home with a gentle lie and a post-it note tucked into his bag. He was acting like someone who didn't feel the absence at all. "What's wrong?" Kara asked, peering over her mug. Her voice pulled me back like a rope out of a freezing lake. I handed her the phone, hands trembling. Jenna leaned over. "Wait, is that?" "Yep," I whispered. "That's Evan. That's his brother's engagement party. That's the party I didn't know existed." Jenna stared. "He told you it was a reunion. Casual, lake house, golf and humidity," I murmured bitterly. Kara's eyes flashed. "He lied to your face." And he had. But more than the lie, more than the tuxedo, or the crystal chandeliers, or the secret toast, it was the ease of it all that wrecked me. Evan had slipped into that room, raised that glass, delivered that speech like I was a footnote, a shadow, like I didn't matter enough to cause waves, And no one in that room had asked where I was. No one had cared enough to say, "Wait, where's Rachel?" I could almost hear the justifications forming in his head. It wasn't a big deal. It was for family only. Mom said it would be easier if it was just us. But none of that changed the truth that was now burning a hole through my chest. I hadn't been forgotten. I had been intentionally erased. I stood up too quickly. The chair scraped loudly across the floor. "I need air," I said, though I wasn't sure I could breathe. I stumbled out onto the lodge's back deck, snow crunching under my boots, cold wind biting at my skin. But it was nothing compared to the frost that had settled inside me. I gripped the wooden railing, my breath sharp in my lungs. I tried to remember the last time Evan had made me feel like I belonged. Like I wasn't just a companion, but a priority. Like I was someone worth defending. And that's when the memories flooded in. The Thanksgiving dinner where I wasn't told about the earlier family brunch. The Christmas when his mom accidentally left me out of the group photo. The baby shower where I stood in the back, while everyone called Evan Uncle Ev but barely acknowledged me. I'd chalked it all up to quirks, to misunderstandings, to my own social awkwardness. But now standing there with snowflakes melting on my eyelashes, I finally saw it for what it was. They never saw me as one of them, and Evan never made them. If you've ever looked back and realized you'd been rewriting history in your head, editing out the red flags just to feel like you were loved, I want you to say it out loud. Just once. I did matter. I do matter. Because on that mountain with a phone full of curated lies and a heart breaking in silence, that was the first time I began to believe it myself. The night I returned to our home was heavy with silence. The driveway looked the same, the porch light glowing softly against the chill of the autumn air. But everything felt different. I felt different. Evan was already there, sitting in the kitchen with his head resting in his hands, wearing the dress pants and button-down shirt from the engagement party he claimed was just a family reunion. His hair still freshly styled, his posture tense. As I stepped inside, I couldn't help but notice the weight of unspoken words hanging thick between us. "You made everything worse," he said before I could even set my bag down. I paused, the sound of his words echoing louder than I expected. Not a greeting, not an apology, just blame. Worse than what I asked, quietly setting my suitcase on the floor. Worse than lying to me. Worse than excluding me from your brother's engagement. Worse than letting me find out through Instagram that you've been living a double life. He ran a hand through his hair, the mask of composure slipping for a brief moment. "You don't understand how complicated this is. Explain it to me," I challenged. "Why wasn't I invited? Why did you lie?" He swallowed hard. "Mom wasn't comfortable with you there. She thought you wouldn't fit the vibe." "The vibe?" I laughed bitterly. "You mean the vibe where your wife is invisible? That's not fair." "Fair." His voice rose. "You want to talk about fair? You packed my bag, slipped me a note with a heart while you knew you weren't welcome." His face turned pale as realization hit him. "You went through my things." "I didn't go through anything," I replied firmly. "I left you a note because I thought you might miss me." He sighed, defeated. "I did see it. It was sweet. But you have to understand." "No," I interrupted. "I don't have to understand. I understand now. Your family thinks I don't fit. They didn't want me there." "What do you want me to do?" he asked softly. "Did you fight for me? Did you stand up to them?" Silence. "It's complicated," he whispered. "They have their ways. If I push too hard, they'll disown me. So you'd rather lie to me than risk their approval." I turned away, my heart aching with the finality of it all. "I'm leaving," I said, voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. "This house isn't mine anymore." He called after me, but I didn't look back. I packed what was truly mine: clothes, books, memories not tied to him. That night alone in a friend's apartment, I finally felt the weight lift. I wasn't invisible anymore. And as the days passed, messages poured in from women who understood, women who had been left out, silenced, but were now finding their voices. Because sometimes the hardest goodbye is the one that frees you to say hello to yourself. If you've ever felt like you were the outsider, know you're not alone. Share your story in the comments. Your voice matters. Waking up in Mel's cozy apartment felt like stepping into a new world, a world where my worth wasn't measured by invitations or whispered judgments. The light filtered softly through the curtains, painting warm patterns on the hardwood floor. I sipped my morning coffee, feeling the strange mix of relief and uncertainty settle over me. For years, I'd been holding on to the hope that things would change, that Evan would stand up for me, that his family would eventually accept me as one of their own. But acceptance that depended on silence and invisibility was no acceptance at all. It was a prison. The messages I received from strangers poured in like a lifeline. Sarah from Michigan shared how she'd been excluded from her husband's family for nearly a decade, afraid to speak up for fear of losing everything. Jennifer from Ohio thanked me for giving voice to what she had suffered in silence. Lisa, a neighbor, simply said, "You're better off without them." These stories weren't just comforting, they were a call to arms. We were a community bound by the shared pain of exclusion and the fierce determination to reclaim our dignity. That weekend, I joined a yoga class led by Grace, a woman in her 60s, whose calm strength filled the room. After class, she pulled me aside. "I don't know your story," she said gently, "but I see your courage. Rebuilding isn't easy. Keep going." Her words echoed what I was beginning to understand. Strength isn't the absence of struggle, but the courage to face it head-on. I started spending more time with Mel and her friends, real dinners filled with laughter, honest conversations, and no masks. I even took my niece Emma to the movies. When she asked why Uncle Evan wasn't with us, I told her, "Sometimes grown-ups need space to figure things out." She accepted it with the simple wisdom only children possess, and made me laugh harder than I had in months. Life without Evan was quieter. Yes, it was lonely in some moments, but it was a quiet that brought peace. A peace born from no longer having to walk on eggshells, second-guess my presence, or hide my pain. The mountain photo stayed on my Instagram, unedited and unapologetic. Though I considered deleting it when I learned about the fallout it caused Evan, every time I hesitated, I remembered the sunlight warming my face, the clarity in my eyes, and the simple truth I had spoken. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't a declaration of war. It was a statement of existence, a refusal to vanish quietly. I watched as the post sparked conversations, inspired others, and connected women across towns and states. It became more than a photo. It became a beacon. On a quiet Tuesday evening, almost a month after I left, I was working on a freelance proposal when Evan showed up at Mel's door. His voice was strained, pleading, "Can we talk? Please." I stood behind the door, listening to the familiar yet distant sound of a man I once loved. But that person was gone, replaced by someone weighed down by the consequences of choices made. When I finally opened the door, I saw the defeated look in his eyes. "I know I messed up," he said softly. "We can work through this." I shook my head. "You had 5 years to stand up for me. You didn't. And now it's too late." His silence was the loudest answer. That night, I closed the door gently, not with anger, but with the quiet strength of someone who has finally found her voice and her freedom. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever felt unseen or unheard, leave a comment. Share your journey, because together our stories can light the way for others still searching for their own truth. In the weeks that followed, I found myself reflecting more deeply on the subtle erosion of my sense of self. The quiet moments that had slipped by unnoticed until now. The forgotten birthdays, the uninvited dinners, the side glances that said, "You're here, but not really." Each instance had felt small on its own, but together they formed a tapestry of exclusion that slowly strangled my confidence. I started keeping a journal, documenting every red flag I'd dismissed, every excuse I'd told myself to stay. I wrote about the times Evan's phone buzzed and he'd quickly hide it, the family photos on social media that conveniently omitted me, and the way conversations shifted the moment I entered a room. Writing made the invisible visible. It forced me to confront the reality I'd been too afraid to acknowledge. One afternoon, while curled up with my journal and a cup of chamomile tea, I realized something profound. This wasn't a marriage that had suddenly gone wrong. It was a relationship that had been quietly poisoning me for years. The gradual withdrawal, the passive acceptance of exclusion, the prioritization of others' comfort over my dignity. It all pointed to a slow but steady unraveling. Yet amidst the pain, there was a spark of hope. The realization that I was reclaiming my voice, my story, and ultimately my freedom. With newfound clarity, I booked a solo trip back to the mountains, the same lodge, the same trails, the same summit where I first saw the truth so clearly. This time, I went alone, embracing the solitude that allowed me to heal and rebuild. As I reached the peak surrounded by endless snow-covered peaks and vast blue skies, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The woman who stood there was not the hurt and betrayed wife from a month ago, but someone stronger, someone ready to embrace a future defined not by others' approval, but by her own truth. I opened my arms wide, letting the cold air fill my lungs, and whispered softly, "I forgive you. I release you." It wasn't forgiveness for Evan or his family, it was forgiveness for myself, a way to shed the heavy burden of anger and move forward unencumbered. The mountain didn't judge or exclude. It welcomed me with open arms, clear skies, and endless possibility. If you are watching this and feeling trapped by someone else's expectations or silence, know that forgiveness can be your first step to freedom. Share your story below because your truth deserves to be heard and your journey matters. And if this story has touched you, stay with me. There's more ahead, more lessons, more strength, and more light. Don't forget to subscribe and join this journey of resilience and courage. Returning home felt surreal, like stepping into a familiar place that no longer felt like mine. The driveway, the porch, the little potted plants on the steps, everything was exactly as I'd left it. Yet something fundamental had shifted inside me. I wasn't the same woman who had packed her bags and walked out weeks ago. I was someone new, shaped by the pain and clarity that time away had brought. Evan was waiting in the kitchen when I arrived, dressed still in the shirt and slacks from the engagement party weekend. His hair was neatly styled, every detail carefully maintained, but his stance was tense, defensive. Arms crossed, jaw clenched, he looked ready for a confrontation he'd rehearsed 1,000 times in his head. "You made everything worse," he said the moment I stepped inside. The words hit like a cold slap. Not a greeting, not an apology, just blame. I set my bag down slowly and met his gaze. Worse than what I asked evenly. Worse than lying to me. Worse than excluding me from your brother's engagement party. Worse than letting me find out through Instagram that you've been living a double life. His composure faltered for a moment as he ran a hand through his hair. "You don't understand how complicated this is." "Explain it to me," I said, steady and strong. "Why wasn't I invited? Why did you lie about where you were going?" He swallowed hard, looking away. "Mom wasn't comfortable with you being there. She thought you wouldn't fit the vibe. You know how formal these events are." I laughed bitter and low. The vibe. The vibe where the wife doesn't belong. "That's not fair, Evan." "Fair?" His voice rose. "You want to talk about fair? You packed my bag with a love note while you knew you wouldn't be welcome. You went through my things?" His face paled. "No, I left you a note. Because I thought you might miss me." He sighed, defeated. "It was sweet. But you have to understand they have their ways. If I pushed too hard, they'd disown me. I'd lose them. So you chose their comfort over my dignity," I said quietly. He looked like he wanted to say more, but found no words. I turned to the door. "I'm leaving." He called after me, but I didn't look back. Packing was methodical, deliberate: clothes, books, personal items. I left behind the shared life we had built because it was no longer mine. That night alone in Mel's apartment, I felt the weight begin to lift. No longer invisible, no longer silenced. Messages from women who understood poured in. Women who had suffered exclusion, rejection, and quiet erasure, but found strength in our shared stories. Because sometimes walking away isn't the end, it's the beginning of reclaiming yourself. If you've ever been made to feel invisible in your own life, leave a comment below. Your voice deserves to be heard. And if this story resonates, stay with me as I share what comes next, the healing, the growth, and the power of choosing yourself. Don't forget to subscribe to join this journey of resilience and self-discovery. The weeks that followed my departure from Evan's house were a whirlwind of emotions and unexpected revelations. I found solace in the company of my friends, Mel and Jenna, whose unwavering support became a lifeline during those turbulent days. Their apartment became my sanctuary, a place where laughter wasn't forced, and where I could breathe freely without the heavy weight of exclusion pressing down on me. One crisp autumn evening, Mel invited me to join a yoga class, led by Grace, an instructor whose serene presence and gentle wisdom immediately drew me in. Grace was a woman in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a loose bun and eyes that seemed to have witnessed life's many storms and survived. After the class, as we gathered our mats, she pulled me aside and said softly, "I don't know your story, but I see your courage. Rebuilding yourself takes strength. Keep going." Her words resonated deeply. For so long, I had been focused on what I'd lost: my marriage, my sense of belonging, my trust in Evan. But Grace reminded me that strength wasn't about perfection or quick fixes. It was about facing the pain head-on and choosing to rebuild piece by piece. During that time, I began documenting my journey in a journal. Writing became a cathartic release, a way to untangle the web of hurt, confusion, and betrayal that had clouded my heart. I poured out memories of quiet dismissals, the invisible barriers erected by Evan's family, and the subtle ways in which I was made to feel less than worthy. Each page was a step toward reclaiming my voice and my truth. As days turned into weeks, I noticed a shift within myself. I was no longer just the woman left out of family photos or excluded from conversations. I was becoming someone who understood her value, who refused to be defined by others' narrow expectations. My niece Emma, just 8 years old, became a bright spot in this new chapter. Taking her to the movies one Saturday afternoon, I found joy in her unfiltered laughter and innocence. When she asked why Uncle Evan wasn't with us, I told her simply, "Sometimes grown-ups need space to figure things out." She accepted this with the easy wisdom only children possess, and proceeded to make me laugh harder than I had in months. Life without Evan was quieter, yes, but it was a quiet that brought peace. It was a freedom to exist without constantly questioning my worth or tiptoeing around invisible lines. The mountain photo I had posted remained on my Instagram untouched and unapologetic. Though I had moments when I considered deleting it, especially as I learned of the backlash it caused Evan, every time I hesitated, I remembered the sunlight warming my face and the clarity in my eyes. That image was more than just a photo. It was a declaration of survival. What started as a personal act of truth had blossomed into something much larger. Messages flooded in from women across the country sharing their own stories of exclusion and silence. They thanked me for giving voice to what they had long endured in secret. Together, we formed a quiet but powerful community of resilience. One evening, almost a month after I left, Evan showed up at Mel's apartment, his voice strained as he pleaded for a conversation. Standing at the door, I saw the familiar eyes of the man I once loved, now clouded with regret and defeat. But that person felt distant, almost like a stranger. I told him plainly that 5 years had passed, and he had never chosen me over his family. His silence spoke volumes. With a calm resolve, I closed the door, not in anger, but with the finality of someone who had found her strength. If you've ever felt unseen or unheard, I invite you to share your story below. Together, our voices can light the path for others still searching for their own truth. And if this story has touched you, please subscribe to join this journey of courage, healing, and rediscovery. Hoi ChatGPT. As the days settled into a new rhythm, I began to see the ripples my story was creating not just in my own life, but in the lives of others. The post I had shared from the mountain had become more than a simple picture. It was a beacon for those who felt unseen, unheard, and undervalued. Unexpectedly, my phone started buzzing with messages from strangers, women from all walks of life, who had lived through similar pain. Sarah from Michigan shared how she had been excluded from family gatherings for years, never finding the courage to speak up. Jennifer from Ohio sent thanks, saying my story gave her the strength to finally voice her own struggles. Even Lisa, a neighbor I barely knew, messaged me with encouragement. "You're better off without them." This newfound connection with others sparked something profound inside me. I realized that I was no longer isolated in my experience. Instead, I was part of a growing community of women reclaiming their voices and their dignity. Meanwhile, the fallout with Evan and his family continued. The backlash from my post affected Evan's professional life. I learned that he had lost a significant client who cited concerns over his personal situation. While this brought unexpected complications, it also underscored the power of authenticity and speaking truth to power. Amidst the chaos, I took deliberate steps toward healing. I attended yoga classes led by Grace, whose wisdom gently guided me toward self-compassion and strength. I joined dinners with Mel and her friends where conversations flowed freely and laughter was genuine, a stark contrast to the carefully curated silences I had known before. One afternoon, I spent time with my niece Emma. Her innocent questions and boundless joy reminded me of the simple pleasures in life. When she asked why Uncle Evan wasn't with us, I told her, "Sometimes grown-ups need space to figure things out." Her acceptance of this truth was a balm to my heart, and her laughter that day reminded me of the lightness I was rediscovering. Despite the quiet moments of peace, the mountain photo remained on my Instagram, an unedited, unapologetic testament to my journey. Though I wrestled with the temptation to remove it, I held fast to its message that sometimes standing in your own truth is the most powerful act of all. This photo connected me with a network of women, many of whom I would never meet, but whose stories echoed my own. Together we formed an invisible support system, a chorus of voices refusing to be silenced. Then one evening, nearly a month after I left, Evan showed up at Mel's door. His voice was rough, his words pleading for a chance to talk and to fix what had been broken. But the woman who opened the door was no longer the silent partner who had once hoped for change. I looked at him, feeling a mix of sadness and resolve. "I know I messed up," he said softly. "We can work through this." I shook my head, steady and sure. "You had 5 years to stand up for me. You didn't. Now it's too late." His silence said everything. Closing the door behind me, I stepped fully into my new life, one where my voice mattered, my worth was recognized, and my future was mine to shape. If this story has touched you, if you've ever felt invisible or dismissed, I invite you to share your journey in the comments below. Together, we are stronger. And if you want to hear more stories of courage, healing, and self-discovery, subscribe and join me as we continue this journey toward light and freedom. After closing that door on Evan, a new chapter of my life quietly began. At first, it was daunting, the silence where his presence once was, the emptiness of a house that felt less like a home and more like a reminder of what I had lost. But as the days turned into weeks, that silence became a space for me to breathe, to listen to my own thoughts and feelings without fear or judgment. I started rediscovering parts of myself that had been buried beneath years of trying to fit into a world that wasn't made for me. Old hobbies resurfaced, books long forgotten found their way back onto my nightstand, and simple pleasures, a morning cup of coffee, a walk in the park, became acts of healing. One afternoon, I found myself sitting by the window, journal in hand, reflecting on the path that had brought me here. I wrote about the red flags I had ignored, the moments when I had told myself this isn't so bad, and the times I convinced myself that love would conquer all, even when it felt like I was the only one fighting. I realized that love isn't about silence or exclusion. It's about standing together through both the easy and the hard times. It's about being seen, heard, and valued for who you truly are. Slowly, I began to rebuild my life on my own terms. I reconnected with old friends who reminded me of my worth. I threw myself into my career with renewed passion, taking on projects that challenged me and expanded my horizons. Most importantly, I started to set boundaries, firm, unapologetic boundaries that protected my peace and nurtured my growth. And yet, even as I moved forward, there were moments when the past crept in. A familiar song on the radio, a scent that reminded me of happier times, or the simple ache of loneliness in the quiet of the night. But each time I reminded myself that healing is not linear. It's messy, unpredictable, and deeply personal. One evening, while scrolling through social media, I came across a message from a woman named Lisa. She shared her own story of feeling invisible in her marriage, of fighting to be seen, and finally choosing to walk away. Her words resonated deeply, and we soon began exchanging messages of support and encouragement. It was in these connections with strangers who became allies that I found a new kind of family. A family built not on blood or obligation, but on shared experiences and mutual respect. If you're watching this and feel alone in your struggles, know that you're not. There is strength in vulnerability and power in telling your truth. Share your story in the comments below, and let's build a community where every voice matters. Remember, your worth is not determined by how others treat you, but by how you see yourself. If this message speaks to you, please subscribe and join me as we navigate the journey of healing, growth, and self-love together. Life after leaving Evan was filled with moments of unexpected clarity and quiet strength. Each day I discovered new layers of myself, layers that had been overshadowed by doubt, exclusion, and silence. The freedom to be myself without compromise was both exhilarating and terrifying. It forced me to confront the parts of my identity that had been buried under years of trying to fit in, to please, to be accepted. One of the most healing experiences during this time was reconnecting with old friends and forging new relationships based on authenticity and mutual respect. Mel, my closest confidant, became a constant source of support and encouragement. Our conversations stretched late into the night, filled with laughter, tears, and shared dreams of futures unburdened by past pains. I also found solace in creative outlets. Writing, which I had once neglected, became a lifeline. Through journaling and storytelling, I processed the complex emotions swirling within me: grief for what was lost, anger at the betrayal, and hope for what could be. At work, I threw myself into projects that challenged and inspired me. The sense of accomplishment that came from using my skills and talents in meaningful ways helped rebuild my confidence. Slowly but surely, I began to see myself not as a victim of circumstance, but as a woman capable of shaping her own destiny. Yet healing was not without its challenges. There were days when the weight of loneliness pressed heavily on my chest. Nights when memories of the past haunted me, and doubts crept in like unwelcome shadows. During these times, I leaned on mindfulness practices, breathing exercises, meditation, and gentle yoga that helped center me and cultivate resilience. One afternoon, a message from a woman named Sarah arrived in my inbox. She shared her own story of feeling invisible within her marriage and finding the courage to leave. Her words touched me deeply, reminding me that while our journeys were unique, our struggles and triumphs were interconnected. Through these connections, I began to understand the power of community. We were not alone in our pain or our healing. Together, our voices could create a chorus of strength and solidarity. If you are listening and feeling unseen or unheard, I encourage you to speak your truth. Share your story in the comments below and become part of a community that values your voice, Healing begins with being heard. And if this story resonates with you, I invite you to subscribe and join me on this path of courage, growth, and self-discovery. Together, we can turn our wounds into wisdom and our pain into power. As the weeks went by, I found that the hardest part of healing was learning to trust again, not just others, but myself. For so long, I had second-guessed my feelings, questioned my instincts, and silenced my voice to keep the peace. But now, freed from the constraints of a relationship that had slowly chipped away at my self-worth, I was determined to reclaim my inner strength. One evening, while sitting by the window watching the rain fall softly against the glass, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The tangled emotions of betrayal and loss still lingered, but they were accompanied by something new, a quiet sense of empowerment. I was no longer defined by what others had done to me. I was defined by how I chose to rise. In that moment, I realized that healing wasn't a destination, but a process, a daily commitment to honor my feelings, set boundaries, and nurture my growth. It meant embracing vulnerability as a source of strength, not weakness, and accepting that progress often came in small, imperfect steps. I began to explore new opportunities that had once seemed out of reach. I signed up for workshops that expanded my professional skills and joined local groups where I could meet people who shared my passions. These experiences brought fresh energy and perspective, reminding me that life beyond pain was rich with possibility. At the same time, I made peace with the past. I allowed myself to grieve the relationship that wasn't meant to be without bitterness or regret. Writing letters I never sent to Evan, I released my anger and disappointment onto the page, freeing my heart from their hold. Friends became my anchors. Mel, Jenna, and others surrounded me with kindness and laughter, helping to fill the spaces that loneliness once occupied. Together, we celebrated small victories: the first night I slept peacefully, the moment I laughed without guilt, the day I looked in the mirror and saw resilience staring back. Through it all, I held on to the lessons that had emerged from my pain: the importance of self-respect, the power of truth, and the courage it takes to walk away when love no longer nurtures. If you're walking a similar path, know that healing is possible. Your story matters and your voice deserves to be heard. Share your experience in the comments below. Your journey might just inspire someone else to find their strength. And if you feel moved by this story, subscribe to stay connected as we continue exploring what it means to reclaim our lives and live authentically. Together, we are stronger. In the quiet moments between the chaos, I began to understand that my story was not just about pain or betrayal, it was about transformation. The woman who had once felt invisible and voiceless was slowly becoming a beacon of resilience and self-respect. And with that realization came a responsibility to myself and to others who might be walking a similar path. One afternoon, while scrolling through my growing messages of support, I received a text from Emily, Evan's cousin. She confessed that she too had been sidelined by the family's unspoken rules. "I should have spoken up," she admitted. "I'm ashamed I didn't." Our conversation lasted for hours, and through it I learned more about the family dynamics that had kept me at arm's length. Emily's honesty was both painful and liberating. It confirmed what I had long suspected, that the exclusion was orchestrated, deliberate, and maintained by silence. But it also opened a door to understanding, a chance to let go of bitterness and focus on healing. As the weeks unfolded, I continued to build a life grounded in authenticity. I surrounded myself with people who saw me, valued me, and encouraged me to shine. I threw myself into work that mattered, friendships that nurtured, and passions that ignited my spirit. The mountain photo remained a symbol not of what I had lost, but of what I had gained. It connected me to a network of women who had found their voices through adversity. Together, we created a community of strength, sharing stories, offering support, and reminding each other that we were never truly alone. Yet the journey wasn't without its challenges. There were days when doubt crept in, and the scars of past wounds throbbed with memory. But each time I chose to rise to speak, and to live in my truth. If you've ever felt cast aside or silenced, know that your voice matters. Share your story in the comments below and join a community that celebrates resilience and courage. And if this story has touched your heart, subscribe and walk with me as we continue to uncover the power within ourselves to heal, grow, and thrive. Together, we rewrite our stories not as victims, but as survivors and warriors of our own lives. As time passed, I found myself reflecting not only on the pain and betrayal, but also on the lessons I had learned, the hard truths about love, family, and self-worth. The experience with Evan and his family had been a crucible forging a deeper understanding of what it truly means to be valued and respected. One of the most profound realizations was that love should never come at the cost of erasing your own identity. I had spent years molding myself to fit into a family that didn't want me sacrificing pieces of who I was to avoid conflict and rejection. But love that demands invisibility isn't love, it's control. I also understood that family isn't always defined by blood or tradition. Sometimes it's found in chosen connections, the friends who stand by you when your own turn away, the communities that embrace your truth, and the inner voice that refuses to be silenced. With this clarity, I began to rebuild my life with intention. I nurtured relationships that uplifted me, pursued passions that ignited my spirit, and set boundaries that protected my peace. Each step was an act of reclaiming the woman I was always meant to be. Of course, the journey wasn't linear. There were setbacks and moments of doubt, times when old wounds reopened or the loneliness felt overwhelming. But with each challenge, I grew stronger, more compassionate toward myself, and more committed to living authentically. I also discovered the power of storytelling, not just as a personal catharsis, but as a way to connect, inspire, and heal others. Sharing my journey opened doors to conversations I never thought possible, bridging gaps and building solidarity among those who had been silenced. If you're watching this and struggling to find your place, know that your story matters. Your voice can be a source of strength, both for yourself and for others. I invite you to share your experiences in the comments below and become part of a community that celebrates resilience and authenticity. And if you find meaning in this story, please subscribe. Together, we'll continue exploring the transformative power of truth, courage, and self-love. Because the most beautiful stories are those where we rise, not despite our struggles, but because of them. In the quiet moments when the world slows down, I often think back to that pivotal weekend, the weekend that shattered the illusion and revealed the truth. It was more than just a family gathering I wasn't invited to. It was a turning point that forced me to confront the reality of my marriage and my place in a family that never truly embraced me. For so long, I had clung to hope. Hope that things would change, that Evan would stand up for me, that acceptance was just around the corner. But the truth was harsher. Acceptance that required silence and invisibility was no acceptance at all. It was a cage. Walking away was the hardest decision I've ever made. Not because I didn't love Evan or wish things were different, but because loving myself meant choosing freedom over fear, truth over comfort, and my dignity over denial. That choice opened a new chapter, one filled with uncertainty, but also possibility. It gave me space to rediscover who I am beyond the roles imposed on me. It allowed me to rebuild my life on my own terms, surrounded by people who see me, value me, and celebrate my authenticity. As I stand today looking back on that journey, I see a story of transformation, a story of pain met with resilience, silence met with voice, and exclusion met with belonging. My journey isn't just mine. It belongs to every person who's ever felt unseen and dared to step into the light. If you're watching this and find yourself at a crossroads, remember this. You deserve to be seen, to be heard, and to be loved for exactly who you are. Your truth is powerful, and your voice can change not only your life, but the lives of others. I invite you to share your story in the comments below. Let's build a community where every voice matters and every journey is honored. And if this story has touched you, please subscribe to join me on this path of courage, healing, and self-discovery. Together, we will continue to rise stronger and more radiant than ever before. Thank you for listening. As I sit here now reflecting on the journey from that painful weekend to this moment of peace, I realize how far I've come. The path wasn't easy, marked by heartbreak, betrayal, and moments of deep loneliness, but it was necessary. Each step away from the past was a step toward reclaiming my life, my voice, and my freedom. I've learned that healing is not about forgetting or pretending nothing happened. It's about facing the truth with courage and allowing yourself to feel every emotion without judgment. It's about setting boundaries that protect your peace and surround yourself with people who uplift and support you unconditionally. Most importantly, I've discovered that self-love is an act of rebellion in a world that sometimes tries to silence us. Choosing yourself, your happiness, and your well-being is the bravest decision you can make. It's a daily practice that requires strength, patience, and compassion. If my story resonates with you, know that you are not alone. There is a community here, ready to listen, support, and walk alongside you. Your journey matters, your voice matters, and your healing is possible. So wherever you are right now, whether you're just beginning to question in the midst of struggle or stepping into your own light, I encourage you to keep going. Embrace your truth, honor your feelings, and trust that better days are ahead. If you found something meaningful here, I invite you to subscribe and become part of this growing community of courage and resilience. Together, we will continue to share stories, lift each other up, and celebrate the power of choosing ourselves. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your courage. And thank you for believing in the possibility of new beginnings.